This election brought this revelation to me big time. All the more reason to redirect our efforts to our guiding mission, to educate people about our government, encourage dialogue about the basic foundations of our democracy, and empower citizens to make their voices heard. If you are new and would like to receive notices of our upcoming programs, please drop me a line and I will be happy to add you to our email list. All are welcome to our programs, which are free. Our website is www.letstalkdemocracy.org. We will continue creating community to handle what comes our way. We are reaching for resilience. We are planning an in-person community gathering on Thursday, December 12th, here at the library at 6 p.m. I hope you will join us. We plan to offer some music, art, Reiki, meditation, and conversation opportunities to celebrate our community as a grassroots group dedicated to preserving our democracy. We need to recharge, reboot, and revitalize our spirit before we head back into the fray. So mark your calendars, Thursday, December 12th at 6 p.m. More information to follow. My name is Ida Masana, and I am a retired physician and founder of Let's Talk Democracy. As many of you know, Let's Talk Democracy was born after the 2016 election. As a doctor, I went to work day after day, dealing with the suffering of my patients here in Queens, the world's borough, in the aftermath of that election. My patients came literally from all over the world and came with all manner of physical complaints. The Holocaust survivor, the civil rights worker whose life was in danger in the 60s in the South, the Muslim family who wanted to go home worried about the Muslim ban and whether they'd be able to get back into the country. Chinese patients who worried about their parents and children in the subway. Though I had my head in books and journals my whole life, I knew very little about history or government. But I knew medicine was not the answer. We decided to do something. Together with many of you, we started free civics classes back then, and for the past 8 years, with your ongoing encouragement, advice, and support, we have built a grassroots community of learners and civic activists, both in person and online. Many of us worked hard for this general and many previous midterm and special elections. We got involved and we made a difference. Thank you for being a voter and for getting others to vote. Many of us hoped that the Trump era was finally coming to an end. But alas, here we are, grappling with the results that revealed, to my eyes at least, that the American dream of owning a home, having some savings, and seeing opportunity for your children is out of reach for many. Fueled by anger and disappointment, scapegoats, immigrants, blacks, gays, Jews, women, are an easy target rather than face up to the difficult fact that the wealthy of both parties run this country for their own selfish gain, leaving crumbs for the rest of us to fight over. It was Justice Brandeis who said, we can have vast wealth in the hands of a few, or we can have a democracy. We cannot have both. We knew this would be a turnout election. People didn't turn out the way we thought they would to save our democracy and protect our freedoms. Racism, sexism, and white supremacy won the day. That's my take on this election. The work of democracy goes on. My one consolation is that I'm retired and I didn't have to go to work this week. We are forever grateful to Michael Krasner for putting us on the map 8 years ago. Professor Krasner is an award-winning professor of political science at Queens College and co-director of the Taft Institute for Government and Civic Education. He is well known to most of you. He came all the way from Vermont by train to be with us in person here tonight. just like old times. And always, please remember our rules of engagement. And now let's welcome Professor Michael Krasner. And where do we go from here?
Thank you, Ida, and thank you all for being here. I can't help thinking back to the first time I was here. I had taken a fall in my bedroom just before I was supposed to leave, and I told Ida on the phone, please bring your medical bag because I'm bleeding from my head, which she did. And I then gave the talk, and it went pretty well. And then as I was driving home in a cab, I got a call from Ida, and she said, you know, you really should check into an emergency room because you might be bleeding into your brain. And I thought, well, I'm glad you told me that, but I wonder why you waited till after. Anyway, so here's where we're starting, and let's look at the next slide and see where we're going to go. I want to say a little bit in terms of introductory caveats and notes, then look in some detail about what happened in the presidential election, try to analyze that as best we can at this stage, then go ahead with the Senate and the House, then talk a little bit, if there's time, about worst and best case prospects for the Trump administration. So, as Ida said, and as I'm sure all of you know, this is a hard time, and it's likely going to get harder. It's hard to get your head around it intellectually. It's hard to accept it emotionally, and it was hard for me to go into the depth that I had to make this presentation. The stakes are very high, everything we care about. So whatever works for you. I've got a couple of suggestions here. I like Catherine Hepburn movies. But if you know, you're fonder of Cary Grant, that's fine too. But we need to take care of ourselves and take care of each other. I guess that's my final point on that. Second caveat. Some of the data are very clear. We know about the votes. We know a lot less about motivation and causation. That's going to take longer to work out. Oh, thanks. Yeah. Okay. There we go. That's good. Thank you, Kelly. What we have now are exit polls. Exit polls are not the most reliable instruments in the whole world, but you're going to have to wait until June to get the definitive stuff. So the exit polls we have now are good maybe to 5, 6, 7 points margin of error, so we're going to be working with that. Keep it in mind, it's all we've got right now. And the next slide. So there are a lot of things we don't know. We don't know how different issues cross-cut with different people. We don't know why they mattered at a particular moment. We know there were a lot of people that made up their minds at the last minute, and maybe it was just whatever struck them that day. It's all a little bit murky now, but it will get sorted out. Books to look for. The Sidus and Vavrick book has become a kind of perennial. Every 4 years they do a book on the election. Recommend that. Thomas Edsel's columns in the New York Times. He samples a lot of political scientists around the country, so that's another good source. The policy implications of all this, obviously, are enormous, and I'm not going to go into them tonight. It's one of the things that I can't cover. I can't cover that. I can't cover down-ballot races. But obviously, the implications are enormous. Elizabeth Colbert did a nice short piece in the New Yorker about the implications for climate. I recommend that. So, starting off with the presidential election, and just description now, what happened. Trump, as you know, won both the Electoral College and the popular vote. Notice I'm not saying he won fair and square, for reasons that I hope are going to become clear in a minute or two. He didn't quite get 50% of the vote, but close on the projections so far. He did finish about 2 million votes, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, ahead of Harris. The turnout is down, looks like, compared to what it was in 2020, but not a whole heck of a lot. In terms of how close the election really was, which means how many votes do you have to shift in the battleground states to get a different result? In 2016, it was about 40,000 votes. If you shifted 40,000 votes from Trump to Clinton, she's president. In 2020, it was about 70,000 votes. This year, it's bigger, but still, if you shift only 144,000 votes in those 3 blue wall states, you're going to get a Harris presidency. So the stuff that you see in some of the media that this was a landslide is baloney. It wasn't a landslide either in terms of the popular vote. It wasn't a landslide in terms of the margin that gave Trump the victory in the Electoral College. This was a close election, as we all expected it to be. The general shift was toward Trump. This was not a fluky thing. It wasn't here and there. It was across the board. He gained in all age groups. He gained in all ethnic and racial groups. The Democrats lost about 5 million votes from the total that Biden got in 2020. And the strong Democratic areas, the ones that had to come out in force if Harris was going to win, did not do so. But the strong Republican areas, those would be the rural counties, did come out stronger for Trump, and that's what accounts for the victory. Here are some of the details. Some of them are a little surprising, maybe, because we tend to think that younger people, people of color, and women are going to vote for the Democrats, but Trump made gains there as well. Strong gains among the Latino community, and interestingly, he got the majority of the votes from households earning less than $100,000. So the whole idea about the Democrats and working families is put into question by these results. Harris, on the other hand, gets the majority of votes from people who are better off. Trump got the majority of votes from white women. So the reaction that some people anticipated to the Dobbs decision doesn't seem to have been there in anything like the numbers that would have been required for it to be a decisive factor. So now for a little analysis. How could this possibly be, right? I mean, all of us, we know that this is crazy. How come anybody's voting for this guy? How can working people vote for somebody whose main accomplishment in his first administration was a tax cut for billionaires? How can people of color vote for somebody who regularly engages in all kinds of racist rhetoric? How can women vote for the guy who appointed the justices that overturned Roe v. Wade? So those are questions that we're going to look at next. Here's one big thing to keep in mind that, again, doesn't come up very often in the mainstream media. There's an alternate universe out there. The hardcore of Trump's support has a different view of what's real from what most of us in this room have. It's an ultra-nationalist, Christian, patriarchal, racist, xenophobic, homophobic point of view where the United States is always right, always does the good thing, and the threat comes from people who don't accept those values, and Trump is the savior. And because he's the savior, anything that he does is okay. Racist rhetoric, pretending to fillet a microphone, it doesn't matter. He's forgiven in advance. He is their champion. And if they needed any further proof, then the fact that God spared his life in Butler, Pennsylvania, seals the deal. Okay, so it's just important to keep that in mind. Let's look at the next slide. So who's in this bunch, right? If you think back historically at the people that voted for David Duke, for those of you who are below a certain age, David Duke used to be the leader of the Ku Klux Klan in the United States, also I think at one point the head of the American Nazi Party, and he ran for office quite regularly in southern states and used to get about 30% of the vote. So as a rough estimate, other people have suggested that generally in Western societies, maybe 30% of the population is authoritarian and racist. Now, on top of that, in the United States, you put the evangelical vote, that's about 18%. of the population. But there's going to be some overlap there, right? There are some evangelicals who fall into the first category as well. So you can't just say 18 plus 30 and get to 48. We're going to discount a little and say maybe it's 40. And then, you know, the people who feel strongly about guns, maybe another 3 or 4%. So now we're up to 44, and we're closing in on 50. Factor now in the disillusioned working class voters. White people without college educations, that's a very strong group for Trump. And some of you maybe got the same email that I got from Bernie Sanders that said, it's no great surprise to find that working people have abandoned the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party abandoned them a long time ago. His point is these folks have genuine grievances. They have been, this is a technical political science term, sold out by the Democrats. One big example being NAFTA that Bill Clinton passed, not with Democratic votes in the House of Representatives, but with Republican votes, which had disastrous effects for working people both in Mexico and the United States. These folks have genuine grievances. Their standards of living have stagnated. The prospects of their children have gone down. In the absence of a real alternative coming from the Democrats, in the absence of policies that look as though they're going to do something for them, they're going to turn elsewhere. And in the absence of somebody who's going to give them real-world satisfaction, this is a point that David Denby made in a very prescient essay all the way back in 2015, maybe they'll take the emotional satisfaction if they can't get anything real. If that's the best they can do, they'll take that.
Why not give Trump a chance until there's one?
So, let me get to this. On top of this, there seems to be some strong feeling among working people that Democrats are more interested in the concerns and the lifestyles of various kinds of minorities than they are in helping everyday folks. There's a quotation from a worker who was interviewed who said, Democrats seem to care more about who uses which toilet than they do about whether or not I've got a job. The general point being that this over-focus on identity issues leaves out working people, leaves out working families, especially when it comes to very small groups like transgender people, who are perceived by most folks to be quite far from the mainstream. So in that situation, people are going to be asking, who cares about us? Who's doing anything for us? And finally, this is still Trump's coalition, right? Finally, you've got what I call transactional Republicans. By this I mean people who are looking at Trump as somebody who's going to deliver for them in terms of traditional Republican goals, smaller government, anti-union, less regulation, lower taxes. And in exchange for that, they're willing to rationalize and deny pretty much all of the things that they seem to us to be dreadful about Trump, the racism, the misogyny, and so on and so on. And this includes people starting, at the very top of the income scale with Elon Musk, but going down into the middle class as well. And keep in mind, we have a system where, unless you want to throw your vote away on a third party, you've basically got two choices for president, right? You're going to vote for the Republican, you're going to vote for the Democrat, because they're the ones who've got a shot at winning. Well, if you're disillusioned with the Democrats, you don't think that they're going to deliver, whatever the reasons are, you've really only got one good option. Now, there are people who drop out. There are 100 million Americans who don't vote in these elections, so just say the hell with all of them. But if you are going to vote and have it count, it's one or the other. And this year, there were a lot of factors that hurt the incumbents, and we'll get to that next. So I'm going to look now at big trends, worldwide trends that hurt the Democrats and help Trump, and then go into the specifically American factors. So the biggest worldwide trend, this is something that happened for the first time this year since there have been Democratic elections in the industrial world. For the first time, parties that are in power lost share, lost votes in every single country that had an election. There was this very powerful anti-incumbent mood. It didn't matter whether it was Modi on the right in India or somebody on the left. This was an across-the-board phenomenon. And it was fueled in partly, let's go to the next slide, fueled partly by inflation, but also just by this general feeling that things were not good and we want an alternative. Second big trend was in the direction of strongman rule against what we consider to be the norms and institutions of liberal democracy. So people voting for Le Pen's party in France or backing Orban in Hungary or the Alternative for Germany or any of the other far-right parties that have sprung up around Europe, not caring much about process, but wanting some kind of action, wanting to get things done in a big hurry. Trump combines these two, right? He combines both of these factors. He managed to present himself, despite having been president for 4 years, as not part of the political establishment. This was, it was pretty clear, a change election, right? People in the United States wanted change, and Trump, even though he had served 4 years, managed to present himself as a change candidate because he is generally seen as an outsider, as a disruptor. And Harris tried to put him back into the box by calling him, by saying she was going to turn the page and we shouldn't go back to things, we weren't going to go back to the way things were. In the end, that didn't work. And in addition to being able to present himself as the change candidate, he certainly represents somebody who's not hung up about procedural issues or civil liberties or civil rights or due process or anything like that. His slogan is, "I alone can fix it, and I'll do it pretty much any way I like," and he even jokes around about, well, you vote for me in this election, maybe you won't need another one. Ha, ha, ha. Okay, so now the specifics, the American issues and events that helped Trump along the way. And here I have to say, this guy has unbelievable luck. He is lucky in his opponents. He is lucky in the events that happen. So first, if you look at the immediate aftermath of the 6th of January, go back and read the speech by Mitch McConnell. It is a powerful, precise condemnation of what Trump did that day. In no uncertain terms, McConnell says that he was directly responsible for trying to overthrow the government of the United States. And then McConnell went ahead and told his fellow Republican senators to vote to acquit when Trump was up for the second time on impeachment charges. And so he escaped from that. Then the Democrats come into power, and they've got these slam dunk, open and shut cases against Trump, right? There's the phone call that we all heard where he says to the officials in Georgia, just find me 11,900 votes, right? And do we get a quick indictment? Does anything happen for months and months? No, we got Merrick Garland, who's doing whatever he did in the Justice Department. I had the fantasy once of writing an article about this called Committing Suicide on Principle, meaning that they were so concerned about not appearing to be biased and not appearing to use the government's power for partisan purposes, that they didn't do anything even when it was so obviously justified and called for. So he delayed and delayed to the point where when the cases were finally brought, Trump was able to delay them further past the election, which he's now won, and now those federal cases, of course, are going to disappear. Then you've got the state case in Georgia. You know what happened down there, personal problems with the prosecutor. That case probably also going to go down the tube. So he escaped the most serious cases. And then the one case that did come to trial, the one case that did result in a conviction, the 32 felonies from Bragg here in New York, this turned out to be a good thing for Trump. It energized his base. He got all kinds of small contributions afterwards. And it brought back to him some of the billionaires who had been put off by January 6th, and added some new ones who saw him as the victim of a political persecution. Finally, Joe Biden, as you know, presented himself as a transitional candidate. The thought was he was going to be a one-term president. And then, even though his approval ratings were very low, the Democrats did better than expected in the midterm elections in 2022. And the interpretation that was made by Biden was, hey, that approval rating doesn't matter that much, I can run again and have a shot at winning. And the interpretation that was made by other Democrats was, well, maybe he could, and we're not going to really do much to stand in his way, even though he seems to be slipping. And that turned out to be a disaster. It also encouraged Democrats, and you may have seen these arguments. There's a guy named Michael Polhertzer, used to be the political director for the AFL-CIO, another guy named Simon Rosenberg, who had presented a very strong case that there was this anti-Trump vote that had come out in 2018, 2020, 2022, and could be counted on to come out again in 2024. That there was this cohort of voters who, maybe didn't vote consistently, but they were going to come out and vote whenever Trump was on the ballot or whenever Trump was salient. That turned out, as been made obvious, not to be true either. But here's another way that Trump was loved. And now we come to the first debate. Biden's collapsed. The Democrats are in disarray, but Biden won't let go. You remember, weeks went by, and there were two bad results from that. It presented anything like a primary process. It prevented anything like a systematic process within the Democratic Party that looked small d Democratic for choosing who their candidate was going to be. And then, of course, it shortened the campaign time. It made it harder for Harris, when she became the nominee, to get across as strongly as she would have if she'd had more time, her own qualities and her program. Turning now to the campaign, we get to something that Trump is very good at. He's very good at emotional connections. He's very good at presenting himself in this fundamental way of creating what Murray Edelman, who's my favorite political scientist, calls the political spectacle. Three elements in the political spectacle: the leader, the people, the enemy, right? Real simple stuff. That's what Trump does. When he presents an issue, it's in those terms. Inflation is caused by the evil Democrats and inflicted on you, the innocent American people. The Democrats also bring in the rapists, murderers, and drug dealers from Mexico and other places and do harm to you, the innocent people, as well. And then there are the woke politicians who want to give everything away to transgender. And I alone, I, Trump alone, can save you from all of this. I'm your champion. The Democrats struggle to respond effectively. Their language tends to be much more complicated, and their proposals tend to be a lot more piecemeal, one thing at a time, not a clear statement like Trump's, I can fix this. They need simple issues, and they have a way of avoiding them. They never talk, for instance, or didn't talk much, not in my view anywhere near as much as they should have, about raising the minimum wage, which is a real nice and simple issue. Another one that's not in the slide, but the Democrats passed the Earned Income Tax Credit, which took half the children in poverty in the United States out. The Republicans then refused to renew that bill, and those children went back into poverty. Well, there's a good, simple issue, right? We took them out of poverty, they put them back. Never heard that one either. And the big issue, inflation. This one, we've already said how Trump deals with it. The Democrats struggle to deal with this as well. And it's a real issue. It hits people hard. Lots of people had trouble making ends meet. They suffered because the prices went up. And, it goes down, the prices don't go down, they stay up. So when people go into the grocery store, they're still in sticker shock, right? And it's still hard to make ends meet because their wages haven't kept up. And somehow, in the memories of Trump's 4 years, and this, if anybody's got an explanation of this, I'd love to hear it. People remember the times of prosperity, and they forget what happened when the economy tanked during COVID. Trump doesn't get the blame for that. He gets the credit for the good times. And therefore, the simple talk about they made it bad, I made it good, I'll make it good again, that works. The Democrats had a potential counter-narrative around jobs and investment. And they didn't make it anywhere nearly as strongly as they could have. We've talked a lot in these sessions about Democrats and messaging. And here again, keep in mind, one thing that hampers the Democrats is no matter how well they say this, they don't have the kind of media network that's going to amplify it the way Fox News and the other right-wing media outlets, the right-wing talk radio and the other networks do for the Republicans. So it isn't all their fault, but they're not great at it either. One of the things that was missing was the stories of individuals or communities that have been helped by this investment, by the reindustrialization. And what was also missing, with minor exceptions, was an alternate explanation for inflation, which said simply, greedy corporations are gouging you, and we're going to do something about it. They did talk about that with regard to food, but they did it timidly and were very careful to say, it's not all corporations, it's only some of them, and so on and so on. It doesn't have anything like the force that Trump stuff had. In terms of border security, again, you all heard the stories, about the poor women, and it was tragic for sure, who got murdered and so on. And this even came up during one of Biden's State of the Union messages. Marjorie Taylor Greene got this on the agenda then. And we know that there were real issues in northern cities from the flood of immigration as well. There was a slow response from Biden. Harris got blamed because she was named to take one part of this on, working with countries like El Salvador to try to prevent people from coming in the first place. Trump successfully blew that up into she was the border czar, she wasn't the force. And there was no counter-narrative. There was no story in the other direction. Where were the stories about the immigrants who take care of our old people? Where are the stories about the immigrants that harvest our crops? Where are the stories about the immigrants who are the muscle in the construction industry? Not to be heard. That's a huge mistake, huge omission. Another issue that hurt was Gaza, and here I think it hurts in ways that haven't been as well clarified as they should have. Trump's got the magical formula, right? He's going to solve this in the same way that he's going to solve the war in Ukraine. It's going to take him about 20 minutes and it'll all be over. The only thing that gives him credibility on this is that people do remember that there weren't wars when he was president. There's this somehow magic association that, because of that, they'll be able to do something. Harris basically took Biden's line on this, so she alienated the Arab American and the Muslim vote. But I would say that equally important was the effect of this on young people who were prime targets, should have been prime targets for recruitment for the Democrats. The people they lost around this issue were the people who felt very powerfully about it, the activists. In the absence of those issues, of this issue, in the absence of Gaza, those are the people you might have expected to be out working for the Democratic candidate, working against Trump. Instead, they were as much turned off by the Democrats as they were by the Republicans. They didn't mobilize their contemporaries, and Trump did much better among young voters than any Republican in memory. And I think it's partly as a result of these activists being neutralized. The Afghanistan withdrawal was general black eye, obviously, for the Biden administration, but also a specific cause for service people and veterans to vote for Trump, even with the statements being quoted by General Kelly and others about his disparaging remarks about service people. In that way, it was like Benghazi for Hillary Clinton, a very difficult thing to overcome. Turning now to the candidates, moving from issues to the way the candidates presented themselves in terms of leadership qualifications, which is another important dimension of how people vote for president. The media was a big help to Trump. They normalized him. They made him into a regular old candidate like anybody else. Every horse race story, every story, for example, about a survey of who's ahead and who's behind and by how much, every one of them carries with it the implication that this guy's just a candidate like anybody else, and he's not the guy that organized January 6th, and he's not the guy that was held liable for sexual assault, and he's not the guy who was convicted 32 times on felony counts. Instead, he's just another old candidate for president. You can do a mind experiment. Imagine if Trump were black, or imagine if Trump were on the far left, how the media would have, hounded
Or if
him.
Obama did anything that Trump has done.
Yeah, exactly. It would have been a whole different story for sure. There's also the point that Trump's style, his aggressiveness, his strongman posture appeals to certain groups of men, including some black and Latino men and some traditionally minded women as well. The name that some critics gave for what the media was doing was sane washing. That the media normalized what many people took to be indications of Trump's own diminished mental capacities, and in a very different way. They kind of passed over them, whereas they had focused hard on similar failings for Biden. They also didn't press Trump the way they pressed Harris on the details of policy. Trump says he's going to cure inflation. Well, how are we going to cure it? What's your program? Where's the policy? Where's it going to come from? Didn't hear much of that. The fancy name for the appeal to men is hegemonic masculinity. There was a nice piece in the Times about this. You can go back for it. Elizabeth Spears was the author. This is the presentation of patriarchy as the natural order of things. Men should rule over women. Trump said at one point he was going to protect women, whether they like it or not, whether they want it or not. According to people who keep track of the internet, this resonated with some young men on TikTok and other places, and as I said before, with some Latino and black men and some traditionally minded women. Big switch to Trump in the Rio Grande Valley. That's a place that has a lot of conservative Latino people. There's also this interesting research that was done by the guy I mentioned before, John Sidis, and a colleague named Michael Tesler, finds that among people of color, not everybody thinks that color is the big deal. Not everybody defines themselves in that way. 20-25% of black people, Latino people, don't think discrimination matters much in their lives. They have a much more traditionally American mindset. They're individualistic. And to that group, Trump's appeal resonates well, because that's precisely the message that he's bringing. So turning now to the Harris campaign, it's become fashionable to say, I know, and here I'm going to depart from the majority, to say that she ran a flawless campaign. I disagree. I don't think she ran a flawless campaign. I think she did reasonably well under the circumstances, but I think some of the same shortcomings that doomed her own campaign for the presidency back in 2020 showed up in this one as well. And I've got one example here of the difficulty she has in giving a straight answer. The CNN town hall in Pennsylvania, one of the questioners was a Swarthmore professor who said, if you get to be president, and if you had to pick one legislative achievement, one thing that you would be prouder of than anything else, what would it be? Now that's, that's what's called a batting practice pitch, right? That's a real easy one. You say, if I codified Roe versus Wade, or you say, if I restored the earned income tax credit. She couldn't do it. She talked, I timed this, for 3.5 minutes without naming a specific issue. Instead, she went on and on about how she was going to reach across the aisle and be bipartisan. It was just, it was just like you wanted to die in your chair, because the real question is, can you answer a straight question with a straight answer, or are you just another mealy-mouthed politician who's going to bullshit me no matter what? And unfortunately, she answered that. There's also the famous or infamous incident where on The View she was asked, well, what are the things, where you weren't happy with what the Biden administration was doing? I can't think of a single one. Well, it's good in the sense that she's not giving them a cheap headline about, Harris breaks with Biden. But she could say, well, I guess it's pretty clear I'm not Joe Biden, and I have my own priorities. I'm going to be doing things that he didn't do. He did great things. He restored the economy. He brought us back from COVID, but there's other work to do, and we need to make it possible for people to buy homes, and we need to make it possible for people to have child care, so on and so on. That's the answer, not I can't do it. And then, of course, there's sexism and racism, not to be overlooked. And it may be that she could have run a flawless campaign and still lost. It could be that that none of what I suggested being proved would have mattered, even if it were done perfectly. There was this substantial drop-off in the Democratic vote, and there were these shifts among the votes of white women and black men, and Hispanic men and women both. It seems plausible to think that racism and sexism were active there, and let's not forget that Trump's been pushing those issues into everybody's consciousness as hard as he can for at least 10 years and maybe more. On election night, I said a few words to a group of people in Vermont before the trends had become clear. And one of the things I said was, maybe we'll be rescued yet by the women as we've been rescued by the women every time since 2017. And alas, it did not happen. And maybe part of the answer is racism among white women. But it also seems to be that the economic issues canceled out the effects of the Dobbs decision. That there's a piece by a guy named Della Pina in the Times talking about young women.
Della Volpe.
Della Volpe, thank you. Saying that for them, thinking about what was more important, was it reproductive freedom or was it their own future, their own careers? They swallowed hard and came down on the side of somebody they thought was going to make the economy better. So that may have been a factor as well. This is the kind of thing that will get sorted out. One small point to make here. In the states that had referenda on the ballot about reproductive rights, one thing to keep in mind is that this may have had a kind of reverse effect, that women may have felt that they could vote for the referendum and secure their reproductive rights and then go ahead and vote for somebody who was on the other side of the issue, because it wouldn't matter, right? They'd already taken care of that. Strategy, the closing campaigns, the closing of the campaigns, the last part of the campaigns, for both of them. Trump's campaign, the last part of it, they played these transgender ads over and over and over again. And that was their closing. And when I first heard that in a one-sentence summary, I thought, oh, great, that's really off the top. And then I heard the ads, the whole thing. And I was driving at the time, and I damn near ripped out the steering wheel because they were so good. These ads had videotape of Harris saying that she would use taxpayer dollars to pay for sex change operations for prisoners. So what does that say? Oh, and the tagline is, Kamala is for they and them. Trump is for you.
Oh.
So what this means is she's a cultural elitist who cares more about prisoners and, who wants sex change operations, and she's going to use your tax dollars to give these weird people their sex change operations instead of doing something for everyday, patriotic, hardworking, tax-paying, God-fearing
In other words,
Americans.
played that ad at every grocery.
Yeah.
And at the final Republican and the American, at least twice a day.
Yeah.
What he said,
Sheldon's pointing out that they played this ad incessantly at sporting events.
Oh.
Yeah, to hit that audience. Okay, so let's Harris's closing was on the Mall in Washington. Very good speech, I thought. Well presented, strongly argued, on the theme of democracy, which doesn't seem to have resonated so much with independents this year. Probably still good for the Democratic base, but not so good for the independents. They seem to be more concerned with the issues that Trump was pushing. And there did seem to be some backlash here. The Democrats began to use the word fascist quite openly, and some of the people who were supporting Trump seemed to feel offended that they were being lumped in and called fascist when all they wanted was, prosperity. So a quick look now at the Senate and the House. 53 to 47. Casey's still holding out in Pennsylvania, hoping for a small miracle there. It doesn't look likely. This, in the present rules of the Senate, as you know, it takes 60 votes to do something because of the filibuster, so they don't have a filibuster-proof majority yet, but it only takes a majority to change the rules, and even though the Democrats haven't been willing to do that, my hunch is the Republicans will. Let's go on. So what happened in the Senate? When we talked some months back, the Democrats were leading in the battleground states except for Montana. It was a foregone conclusion they were going to lose West Virginia. That would make it 50-50. If they carried all the other contested seats and won the presidency, then the vice president would cast the deciding vote. They did lose Montana, and the Democratic incumbent there had a lot of money. This is John Tester, who's a farmer still and appealing to a lot of people for that reason because he seems like a regular Joe. But there were a lot of new people moved into Montana. They were quite conservative. That hurt it. Instead of putting up a bad candidate the way they did 2 years previously, the Democrats put up a strong candidate, a former Navy SEAL, an apparently successful businessman. Tester spent a lot of money on negative ads against Sheehy. Focus groups that I heard seem to resent that, seem to think that he shouldn't be attacked because he was a vet and a businessman. And the other thing that the focus groups did consistently was to link Tester to Biden and what they viewed as a corrupt political establishment. So going back to the first general point, this is an anti-incumbent vote. And it was true for the other Democrats as well, including Sherrod Brown in Ohio. This race is a little different. Tester had more money in Montana. Brown was the underdog in terms of money in Ohio. He got outspent badly. The winner, Marino, was a wealthy guy, put his own money in. Also a lot of super PAC money, McConnell's super PAC, and cryptocurrency super PACs put in $40 million. And taking the same tack that Trump took, they presented Brown as a standard bearer for transgender surgery. And that seemed to have the same effect that it had, or may have had, in the national election. In Pennsylvania, a similar attack against Casey, who comes from a political family. His father was governor. The hedge fund manager that seems to have won quoted as saying that Casey was born with a political spoon in his mouth. They link him to Biden and the border problem. Democrats have a big ground game in Pennsylvania. Doesn't seem to have been enough. In the House, as you know, the Republicans have gotten to 218, which is what they need. So they will have the majority. The mainstream media reporting on this is extremely irritating because they ignore the fact that there's so much gerrymandering that really makes the difference. And if it weren't for the gerrymandering, the chances are the Democrats would have the small majority. So just keep that in mind when you read the results. This ain't fair and square either. So there's a trifecta. There's no constitutional institution that's going to stand in Trump's way except the state governments. He's trying to even get around the ones that remain. You know that the Constitution calls for the Senate to approve presidential appointments. Trump's trying to get around that by making all his cabinet appointments recess appointments, which means that the Senate doesn't get to approve. We'll see if the Senate puts up with that or not. Okay. If you can stand it, I'll do best and worst.
Wait.
Okay. Worst case. If you want to seize power in the United States, what do you need to do first? You need to neutralize the military. And one way to do that is to go through the list of general officers and get rid of the ones who are constitutionally minded, the ones who've been trained by people like Kelly and Billy, who do have a commitment to the Constitution, and put in people like the Flynn brothers, who are instead loyal to a particular person and unconcerned with their constitutional responsibilities. Let's say you do that. Then you go ahead and follow through on your campaign promise to round up millions of illegal immigrants and deport them, and maybe this involves building camps, and maybe it doesn't. But you've got the possibility, having neutralized the military, of using them if you need to. And let's say, as I think is extremely likely, that a lot of people, not immigrants, rise up against this and demonstrate and protest and maybe commit civil disobedience. They get rounded up too and incarcerated, and maybe, as a growing trend suggests, accused of being terrorists. And if they are accused of being terrorists, they can, under the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, which Barack Obama signed, be held indefinitely without trial. Then declare a national emergency, say things are too tumultuous to have the elections, gag the media, and you now have full-blown autocracy, like Chile under Pinochet. And if you wanted to get a little worse, extend the roundup now not to undocumented people, but to people based on race or ethnicity or religion. In other words, you're rounding people up because of who they are, not because of their legal status. And now you've got full-blown fascism. Possibilities for resistance. Autocracy can be resisted. It has been resisted successfully. Happened in Chile. There are still elections, even if they're often rigged. And the opposition did eventually prevail in Chile, but it takes a while. Fascism is harder because there's a big investment in force. You need here a split in the military. You need some members of the officer corps going in the other direction. And you can hope for some incompetence as well. You can hope for rank and file cylinders resisting. Turning now to the best case, and there's some evidence for this one as well. If Trump focuses on his first love, which is money, and in collaboration with Musk and the other oligarchs, focuses on monetizing the presidency, maximizing his personal fortune, and if his energy and focus continue to decline, as they seem to be doing during the campaign, and if the really varied, I'm going to be as polite as I can, the really varied and diverse collection of people that he has so far announced as appointments fight with each other a lot, as seems likely, and if those conflicts cause a lot of firings, then it may be that this unruly mob won't have much chance to enact policy. If on top of that, Trump does impose tariffs, and if the economists are right and they tank the economy, then it sets the stage for a reaction. And if all of this happens, if all of this chaos and conflict does take place, then the big question is, can the Democrats take advantage of this politically. And if you add to that further infringements on liberty from the evangelicals, if they push for controls on contraception, other things that limit people's choices, then one could hope for the Democrats to make gains in the next round of midterm elections, taking back the House and the Senate, and setting the stage maybe to get the presidency back in 2028. Could be all of that, could be something in between, could be something completely different. People are already organizing to resist and oppose. Turns out people have been thinking about the possibility of Trump winning for a long time. There's an outfit, a coalition of Move On, Public Citizen, Indivisible, and Working Families Party organizing under the We Are Worth Fighting For slogan. And they've been planning this for a year. They've got a whole battle plan worked out and are in the process of recruiting and training people even as we speak. So if you're interested, that's their website. Another group called Choose Democracy, the Movement Voter Project, still active. A whole bunch. Whatever happens, whatever way this goes, we can use help from the poets. So I'm going to leave you with a stanza, the last stanza from Amanda Gorman's The Hill We Climb. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light. If only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. Thank you. Happy to take questions. Questions, comments, and group remarks.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, I just want to remind people that we do have a rules of engagement, which is on the board over there. So be respectful, raise your hand, and to make any comments. Don't interrupt. We also ask you to respect a 2-minute limit. Keep your comments brief and to the point. Avoid making generalizations or assumptions. Use I statements. And no personal attacks. So what we're going to do is we have another microphone, and we'd like people to line up either on this side or on that side. If you have any questions for Professor Krasner, we have one microphone, right? We have one microphone?
That was so.
Oh, right, yeah, so we'll leave them answer on it. So, yeah, so maybe people who have questions can line up over there. Andy, I saw your name, your hand up first, so why don't you come up and then other people can get online.
Ida, since I have the microphone, first of all, thank you so much. I think you filled in a lot of details. Because I've been watching every pundit on every channel there is. And so that has led me to think that this has been the perfect storm in favor of Republicans and Trump against the Democrats and Harris. I think they did everything right and the Democrats did everything wrong. There are so many things you pointed out, a lot of them. Some of them were outside of Harris's fault of what she could do, because I think personally, I always thought that once there was a black president, it was going to be a hot day in hell? No, a cold day in hell before a woman was elected president. I always believed it. And as much as I wanted Hillary to win, I knew she would win. And then I really fault Biden and the Democratic Party because he had positioned himself as a transitional president. And they should have prepared somebody. And I don't think it should have been Harris, because Biden worked against Trump because he was similar to him and opposite Obama, opposite Hillary Clinton. With Harris, it was not going to work. I don't think whatever she did was gonna put her that strong a candidate against Trump. And if I have a question, and then I think that there's a lot of sociological things that are not being taken into consideration by the Democrats. What's happening that's different with young people, what's happening with social media, what's happening with young men. Feel that, they see Trump as a tough, strong guy, and he's gonna fight for me. And Harris was never gonna do that. Harris was never gonna be seen that way. So if I have a question, it's when will the Democrats learn how to fight to win? That's my question.
Yeah, well, the hope is sooner rather than later, because time's running short on a lot of issues. I think there's a barrier. There's a barrier for the Democrats learning. And what I'm not going to present this as a revelation. I'm sure you all know that the Democratic Party is divided between a wing that's represented by people like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and then a more conservative wing that's represented by people like Chuck Schumer. So if you call Schumer the Schumer-Clinton wing, the corporate wing, and Bernie's wing, the movement wing, I think when you have a party that's divided like that, it's hard to talk about the party learning anything, because Bernie already knows this, and Schumer is never going to know. And the question is, where's the balance of power in the party? And that's a different question. And I don't think we're going to know the answer to that for months. But I think it is going to come down to power.
Thank you. Hi.
Hey.
Good to have you as an information person. I did something stupid. I'm going to ask you something where there might be an answer, and you all, by the time I walk in the seat, I'll forget what you said. If there's some charitable person who there is an answer who could write it down for me, I would appreciate it. And I pray to God there will be a need. My story is that with no money, idealists gathered together, and we actually wrote a climate bill. The Greens tell me that I cannot open my mouth in any of their meetings about the bill. The Greens will not publicize even the bill to say, well, here's something you can watch. If you like it, contact Rachel. The only thing we have doesn't cost any money. If we are constituents, we get to talk to the big guys in Congress, and God help us, Espaillat actually filed the bill in the House. Makes no difference to the Greens. They give me total cold shoulder, so I can't find any constituents, because they won't even tell their own people about the bill. I am looking for a group now that is not green. I have given up on them. And I was thinking of going to something like Indivisible and saying, I know you don't usually do this, but my God, we've got to do climate during the next 4 years. Could you help and send your members as constituents to every congressman, every senator in this country, because you are big. That's my question. You have this nice list of people like Indivisible who are going to fight back, ACLU. If you gave me the slide, should I go to every single one of them, or is it someone in particular, some organization that might help most?
I'd start with Move On. Move On has a kind of standard operating procedure where you can begin petitions. And I think what you want to do is write a petition that references your bill and provide people with a summary of the bill, and then see if you can craft a petition that says, we're trying to gather support for this and, bring it to as many congressional offices as possible. But That's my top of the head suggestion. I think they're the most open to this kind of policy initiative.
Okay, anyone else on the list? Try them all?
Sure, I
I've
mean,
got plenty
you
of
know,
time because I've got nobody in Congress to talk to.
yeah, yeah.
May I have a photo of the list?
Yeah, cool.
Okay, and Google it, I'm
Yeah,
familiar
yeah,
with
I'll
it.
send you the whole
Sure.
slide.
Yeah. God bless you. Thank you.
Hi, I'd just like to say to Rachel and the whole room, it is the environment, stupid. I mean, it's like the one issue that encompasses everything. So anyway, just a comment. I had a question. Trump and Trump voters, keep going on about how great the economy was under them. What did he actually do to improve the economy that he didn't inherit from Obama pre-COVID? What was it that he did?
Yeah, well,
Did he just go with it, or?
Are you, is your question in terms of what do people think he did, or what does he think he did, or did he really do anything?
Did he do it? Did he do anything?
My opinion is he didn't do a blessed thing.
Thank you.
I think his claim is going to be that his tax cuts did.
Right.
October 27, almost $3 trillion tax.
So, or he's going to say that it was the cuts and regulations.
Right.
And, whether that penetrates and moves the people in his coalition, I think depends on which people you're talking about.
But there was a feeling in the country, among a significant number of Trump voters that, yes, the economy was better
Yeah,
under Trump.
yeah.
So,
But that's different.
well,
That's correlation, right? People do that. Americans do that. Americans blame presidents if the economy is bad, and they reward presidents if the economy is good, and they don't go through the process of, well, what did he do exactly that made it that way? There were these 4 policies and it produced it. No, it's straight correlation. It's like, times were good, they get the credit. Times were bad, they get the blame. Just that simple.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And it's all the amnesia that's happened since too, right? Because they forget.
Okay.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Lisa. I'm very happy to attend this forum. And actually, I stopped by really. Okay, so make it short is that couple questions. Yeah, even though I vote for Trump, but actually I can see the credit which the women supposedly. Harris only in the last minutes only like 3 or 4 months preparation, and even though she didn't elect as the president, but the credit as the campaign and the I would say revolution for women, in such a highest rank to be president could be happen in the future. It's a good start. Everything is a process. Everything, especially election. So even though she lost, even though I don't vote for her, but I will appreciate more women can, participate in political, okay, especially for the minority too. Second of all, I still don't know why the inflation was so high. I've been in America for almost 30 years, and actually seriously, this 2 years is the most horrible grocery shopping in my life. Even though I was poor in college, because I was immigrant at the time, So, but after college, I have a pretty stable and good job career. I never really worry about the job seeking or the grocery. It's just because of my disability for 4 years and whatever, and then it's horrible. My neighborhood, the supermarket sell not even organic egg, just a regular dozen egg. It's about $4-5 regular price. Even though it's $8, which is very basic. Unless I go to Trader Joe, but because I sometimes have food pay and carpet tunnel, I cannot walk too far. So I really want to ask, the gas price is very stable. I saw it's still under about $3 to $4, not even $4, $3, 3 something. How come the inflation of basic groceries is still so high, which is very simple egg? Okay. And the third question I really want to ask is about, so no matter what, the reality is Trump was elected as the president. I think not even inflation, I think it's a lot of, it's called immigration issues, okay, besides gender, whatever. I remember when I was coming in America in 1995, the first thing my father told me, okay, this is a dream country. You won't die of no food. It's just a matter that you have to work hard. That's why I worked really hard in college, even though English is my second language. So making sure is that we have to really work hard as an immigrant, because I appreciate Trump is that some of them I really appreciate, because sometimes he's very crazy in his talking. I mean, 4 years ago but this time he's more calm in the speech. You can see much more calm and much more, I would say, rational. I'm sorry. That what should I say? Internationally, yeah. So because she said time's up. Okay, I have to stop. Okay. So yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So the question was, why was the inflation so bad? And you can certainly get an argument on this, and the argument's going to follow political lines to a considerable extent. There are some economists and some political leaders who said that the inflation was so bad because large corporations took advantage of the situation and raised prices more than they needed to and produced huge profits for themselves at the expense of consumers. There are other people who said that the inflation was caused by the payments that were made during COVID by the government to support people who weren't working, and that this put too much money in the economy, and that the large amount of money that went in caused prices to go up because there were too many dollars, people had too much purchasing power, and too few goods, partly because of supply line disruptions, and therefore prices went up. So there's a kind of free market explanation, which is the second one that I gave you, and then there's an explanation that blames greedy corporations, and that's the first one. So you can get an argument about this, and I don't think we can settle it in the next 30 seconds.
Professor Krasner. Just seems like yesterday, I was sitting in class with you, and we were debating or discussing Jimmy Carter's election. It just seems like yesterday. I can't believe. Anyhow, I just had to say that. So I want to raise the issue about Gaza. I know you've mentioned it, but as somebody who identifies the Orthodox Jewish community, but also has progressive values, it's been hard for me the past year. In terms of both personally, because I don't fit in either community. I'm seen as an Orthodox Jew as aligning with Netanyahu, which I'm not. Okay, but then within the Orthodox Jewish community, I'm seen as a left-wing crazy. So how do we begin to bridge that? And I mean, and this is an important question here, specifically for this community, and also for Queens, because we know there are large pockets of Orthodox Jewish communities here, and if we want to be successful, we have to figure out ways to bridge that. And for people to understand that there are, I know it's hard for me to find, but there are not only Orthodox Jewish people, but Jewish people who are trying to, again, if you're following what's going on in Israel, from what I'm reading, there is a growing resistance to Netanyahu, and every day I pick up the newspapers and I see the war is spreading. It terrifies me. I always thought Israel as my kind of like my safe space. Not a safe space for me anymore. So I just, again, I guess I'm highlighting the challenges that Gaza presents. I know you mentioned it, but I think it's kind of complicated. It complicates things here in this community.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more strongly that Gaza is an extremely difficult issue that has polarized campuses and communities, not just in Queens, but suburbs and around the country. And it seems to bring out tribalism in a very powerful way. And when those kinds of life and death, venomous emotions are aroused, it is difficult to do what you're saying and bridge the gaps. In that kind of situation, I'm a big proponent of starting by asking questions. If you're engaged with somebody else, instead of, starting off with, don't you see all those dying children in Gaza? I think it's more fruitful to say something along the lines of, can you go back a few steps and tell me more about your fundamental concept of the situation? How do you see this conflict generally? What are the things that have influenced you and brought you to those conclusions? Are there any doubts that you have about it? Are there any situations where you don't feel so strongly, or you're not as clear as you'd like to be about your own feelings? I mean, I think maybe that offers the possibility for something other than full-scale verbal conflict, but it is unquestionably an extremely difficult situation.
Hi, my name is Miriam. I know some of you, but not all. So I have a comment that I'd like you to respond to. I thought you gave a great presentation, as I was very upset over the last week and a half. I've spent a lot of time reading also, and the one thing that I felt like was really important that you didn't mention has to do with the long-term falling apart of democratic organization around the country. Like, I was glad to see over the last few days that the drop in turnout wasn't as terrible as people thought. It wasn't as fabulous as in 2020, but it was about the same as it's been for the 3 before that, very high. And the margin wasn't that wide, but I felt like we keep doing this thing, we had this problem with the electoral college, 7 swing states, and going there, and all these people that don't, are talking that are strangers, and sometimes people do it really well and sometimes they don't. But what they haven't done is really rebuild what was lost there and in many places. So the Republicans have these armies of evangelicals that are sort of like this fairly widespread base, and there just isn't that anything comparable for the Democratic Party. And a lot of people say that was partly Obama's fault. There was abandoning the red states and sort of pulling things apart after he won. But I wonder what, it's a long-term thing that maybe he made worse. And I wondered what you thought about that and what you thought it would take to regain real organization everywhere, and especially if we're going to have the damn electoral college in the swing states. What would it take to do more what Stacey Abrams did in Georgia in a way, right?
Okay, so the question has to do with kind of institutional decline of organizations that had been supportive of the Democratic Party. And I think I would add one element, and that is the decline of labor unions, which used to be probably the biggest grassroots organizations in support of the Democratic Party, allied with the Democratic Party, and which, as you know, have suffered terrible declines and been replaced in some situations by right-wing organizations like the National Rifle Association, which has come in places like Western Pennsylvania to play the kind of social role that the unions used to play. So one way that I think this could be reversed, which is obviously a lot more difficult to imagine with Trump in office than it would have been with a Democrat in office. But supporting and encouraging the resurgence of labor unions would be one way to try to restore that kind of connection between Democrats and everyday people. In the shorter run, there are some organizations that are trying to do this kind of grassroots organizing. I mentioned one in that slide, the Movement Voter Project, which supports grassroots organizing, particularly in the battleground states, but in other places as well. And I think raised about $77 million in this last election cycle, so they're a pretty substantial operation. There's also a group called Focus for Democracy, which grows out of the labor unions and is trying to do similar year-round organizing, not just organizing during electoral campaign. So there are some groups that are moving in this direction. Obviously, the Republicans do have an advantage here with the mass churches and some of the other organizations that they command, but there are groups that are trying to move the needle in the other direction.
We only have 5 minutes left, so I ask you, Sheldon, and you two to get through. You have to keep your questions very short.
So I don't have a question, I have a comment. I want to deliver a technical, historical view on the origin of the inflation. I wish that this young woman would listen, because this is important for people to understand why we're suffering this extended period of inflation. By the way, it's not that bad if you look at it historically. It would, not only for our country, but for most of the world. In fact, the United States is doing better than most of the world with regard to inflation. But the primary causes of the inflation are what happened in 2020 and 2021. Do you remember what happened then? COVID. So COVID, we first had spectacular deflation, followed by a return and feigned supply chain problems. That was massive inflation. And then lo and behold, we had a war that is ripping Europe apart. And what else it's doing is that Ukraine and Russia, who are two of the largest suppliers of grain to the world, are now fighting each other, and grain is not being delivered to the world the way it ordinarily would be. That drives prices up. You mentioned eggs. Well, simple eggs, let me explain what happened. You won't hear that from the other side, but I'll try to explain it to you. Egg producers went through a terrible flu amongst the chickens. They had to kill, I forget what it was, about 500,000 birds. No, it wasn't. It happened relatively. No, that's not true. Okay, I'm being cut off.
Thank you, Sheldon. Actually, you're reminding me that in my travels around the world over the last 40 years or so, that even like in Europe, I remember in Italy being shocked at prices, certainly in Switzerland, going out to eat or even anything like that. We have been very blessed actually in this country to have relatively low inflation, even what is relatively high inflation for us. But it has been, thank you, because I didn't really think about that, but the messaging, that's not what we're getting in the news. But anyway, Professor Krasner, I was gonna make a couple of points, but I'm just gonna get right to my question. Because I've spoken with a friend of mine who's a lifelong Republican and comes from a long family of Republicans. Of course, it's a different Republican Party, and his family is primarily law enforcement people. He voted for Trump, he never voted for Trump. He didn't vote for either candidate at the top of the ticket in 2016, but in 2020 and this year, he did vote for the Democratic candidate because he's a critical thinker. And he says when he speaks to his family, and he's been telling me this for years, he's concerned because he's like, you have to always look at where they get their news, their quote unquote news. So my question to you is, I'm really worried about this.
you know, you read about this in history, and I never thought I would see it in this country, but how do we combat this propaganda infrastructure that we see? Because I see money, big, huge amounts of money and propaganda working together, and in every single election, primary or general, whoever gets that, they win.
I don't think there's a quick, simple answer to that question. The creation of what I call the right-wing media network that began with talk radio and grew then with Fox News and continues to grow in social media. Is very powerful and isn't going away anytime soon. I think the Biden administration, whatever its shortcomings, created the basis for beginning to combat that propaganda world by making material changes in the real world, like the Infrastructure Act and the CHIPS Act, that we're going to make and are going to make differences in the lives of everyday people that would run counter to the propaganda. So, you know, unfortunately, the fate of those efforts is very much up for grabs. But I think, in a general way, that illustrates one possible response, which is actions in the world which make a difference in people's lives that can't be, talked away or ignored.
Last quick question.
I have 5 seconds. I just want 5 seconds. Midas News Network is what?
Midas News
Midas News Network.
MIDAS?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Quick question.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Good.
Our question has to do with the VP selection. You didn't touch anything how the selection of the VP influenced the election in either side.
Yeah.
So how did it shape the campaign strategy or voter perception in swing states, or the enthusiasm of the demographic?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's been a lot of second guessing of Harris, saying that if she'd only taken Josh Shapiro, maybe she would have carried Pennsylvania, and maybe it would have been better because he would have been perceived as a moderate, and Walz was too far left, and all the rest of this. Historically, there's not much evidence that the vice presidential pick matters a lot. Most of the focus seems to be on presidents when people are making up their minds who to vote for. The one way that the vice presidential selection does seem to make a difference is if it looks as though the president's made a terrible mistake, the way it looked as though John McCain had made a terrible mistake when he chose Sarah Palin. Barring that, it doesn't seem to make a lot of difference. So having said that, I'll now say something in the opposite direction. The Times ran its focus group on young people today. Those of you who read the article know that a number of the people in the article who voted for Trump said that they were impressed by J.D. Vance, and part of the reason that they, had moved from being on the fence to voting for Trump was that Vance seemed like such a normal person and somebody that, that they could identify with, and that had sealed the deal for them. So for the few people, at least in that group, I don't know how representative it is, but there is evidence in the other direction.
One more question.
The most important thing going forward, beside all the things he discussed, which was excellent, the 3 big items not discussed by any party that's going to affect us very badly. Number 1, the growing deficit. 1/3 of our bonds, by the way, are owned by foreigners. Number 2, Social Security and Medicare. Did you hear anything how they're going to solve it? No. And maybe the worst one of all, if you saw today's Wall Street Journal, our poor defense readiness at a time when the head of, besides what's going on with Russia, at a time when the head of China has repeated over and over again, and he's building an army and a navy, that he's going to take back Taiwan.
Yes.
All 3 issues not discussed.
Thank you.